Final Fantasy X was the first video game I ever fell in love with. Sure, I'd enjoyed plenty of games in the past, but something about when I played it, and the game itself, captured my imagination completely. I'd stand in my grandparents' back garden, trying to copy Yuna's summoning animations with a broom instead of a staff. I'd try and play blitzball in the paddling pool, and I'd dream of fighting Sin. Obviously, I don't do these things anymore. And yet, the game has stuck with me, as has the world of Spira, its story, and the themes that intertwine them. And so, today, in belated honour of Father's Day, we're going to be looking at one theme in particular, and how it was received differently in the East and in the West. Daddy issues. We've all got them, right? I've got them, you've got them, I've got them, and I've got them. Nothing wrong with it, all perfectly normal. As a famous man once said, they fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. This is self-evidently true within the world of Final Fantasy X. And today we're going to be looking at 3 specific examples: Tidus, Yuna, and Seymour, their relationships with their fathers, and the shadows that these relationships cast. So, to kick off, let's start with the healthiest relationship. Let's look at Yuna and her father, Braska.
Braska dies 10 years prior to the start of the game, sacrificing himself to temporarily destroy Sin, the giant whale monster that threatens all life on Spira. This death has left a hole in Yuna's life, and she seeks to honour her father by emulating his pilgrimage and sacrifice, and giving her life for the good of Spira too. However, as we see from recordings taken during Braska's pilgrimage, this was not necessarily what he wanted. He had Yuna taken to Besaid, to be as far away as possible from the conflict, and wishes for her to find her own path in life. A prominent concept in a number of East Asian cultures is filial piety. The concept is originally rooted in the writings of Chinese philosopher Confucius. Indeed, it was one of the central virtues of his writing. The virtues spread along with the rest of his works and deeply influenced culture in the region. In Confucian ethics, filial piety is not regarded as a choice, but as an unconditional obligation of the child. It is the child's responsibility to their parents to provide them with care, respect, service, and obedience. In many ways, Yuna fits this ideal perfectly. Though her father is dead, she speaks about him with love and reverence, in awe of his achievements and his sacrifice. She wishes to honour him by committing herself to the same path, the same career as he did. Ultimately, however, Yuna is actually able to exceed her father's accomplishments. When she comes to the realization that one of her friends must also be sacrificed, she rebels, putting an end to the practice and finding a way to end Sin for good. If Yuna represents a shining example of filial piety, Tidus and Seymour do not. Throughout the game, Seymour and Tidus act as foils for each other. Seymour is one of the 4 chief priests of Yevon. Tidus is widely considered a heretic. Where Seymour wishes to marry Yuna for political reasons, Tidus loves her genuinely and deeply. Both characters also have deep-seated trauma relating to their fathers. And yet, ironically, it is this parental connection that has brought them both fame and status. Seymour was neglected by his father. As the first ever half-human, half-Guado, he felt isolated from both worlds. For political reasons, both Seymour and his mother were sequestered away from the rest of the culture, separate from his father, a hero of the Guado, who brought them into the Church of Yevon. This separation, this isolation, caused a resentment that was left to fester in Seymour for over 10 years. His mother could see how much this was hurting him, and so, in order to give him a place in the world, Seymour's mother sacrifices her life to give him the power to defeat sin. With this triumph, the people of Spira would finally accept her son, but, crucially, he would have to die to see it through. In an attempt to bring him acceptance, his mother essentially signs him up for a suicide mission, as she believes this is the only way he will ever be accepted. Understandably, Seymour hasn't really taken this well. Now, Tidus' father, Jecht, was a superstar athlete. He was arrogant, an alcoholic, and emotionally abusive to his son, always putting him down, calling him weak, and a crybaby. Tidus' mother was smitten with Jecht, often ignoring her son to spend time with him, and when Jecht went missing, she seemingly completely lost her will to live, leaving Tidus an orphan within a year. Throughout the course of the game, we see the scars this abuse has left on Tidus. Even 10 years since he's seen his father, he is haunted by the memories and the feelings of inadequacy they cause, feeling caught in his father's shadow and desperate to prove himself better. When discovering that Jecht too travelled to Spira, he's dejected to find that his father is just as famous here as he was back home. Jecht comes up in conversation fairly regularly, and when he does, Tidus is quick to put him down, deride him for his arrogance, his alcoholism, and his neglect and abuse of his only son. These revelations surprise Yuna, not only as she herself looked up to Jecht, but also because this runs counter to her belief in filial piety. Yuna even explicitly states that Tidus should not be talking bad about his father, no matter what actions he committed. But Tidus himself asserts, if anyone has the right to criticize Jecht, it's him.
And I mean, he's right. Jecht is objectively... Oh God, I've made a pun. Jecht was objectively abusive. That's something that needs to be called out. Particularly when Tidus is having to still live with the consequences. Tidus has often been considered in the West to be a very weak Final Fantasy protagonist, often derided for being whiny or immature. Some have even said that he should be grateful to Jecht for making him a real man, or trying to at least. Yeah, I would argue that, as Tidus says himself, he has the right, particularly in a society that hero worships his abuser. And I believe many younger people would agree with me. With the rise of social media, we're seeing an increase in people being willing to cut out toxic people from their lives, no matter any sense of familial obligation. This call-out culture of calling abuse, abuse, and speaking truth to power is something that's only become more common, more popular since the game's release. Then, we could see Jecht's transformation into sin as symbolic for what he represents in Tidus' life.
A monster. However, as the game progresses, we start to understand these twin monsters, Jecht and Sin, more and more, and as our sympathy towards them develops, so does Tidus's. And now we come to another link between Seymour and Tidus. They both kill their dads? Now how's that for a breach of filial piety? However, even in the act of patricide, Seymour and Tidus are opposites. Seymour kills his father Giskel for power, taking his father's wealth and status within the Church of Yevon. Yet, the murder's main drive is Seymour's resentment for how he and his mother were treated. Tidus, however, kills Jecht to free him from his torturous existence as sin, and, by extension, freeing all of Spira. In doing this act, Tidus knowingly gives up his own life and fades from existence. Seymour's act was a selfish one. Tidus's was entirely and sincerely altruistic. In a recording made just before his death, Driscoll accepts his forthcoming murder as a just punishment for his neglect of his only son, yet at the same time begs the listener to stop the monster he has created. Tellingly, however, even when accepting his failings, he still distances himself from the role of father, stating that Seymour's mind is obscured to him as a maester of Yevon. Driscoll is aware of his failings, but he never truly overcame them, never truly took responsibility as a father. Using other recorded spheres, we are also able to see that Jecht too is aware of his failings as a father. However, in contrast to Driscoll, we also see that he truly seeks to make amends for them, desperate to find a way back to his wife and son, and eager to bring with them his stories of adventure. He shares these feelings with his friends Oren and Braska. However, importantly, he never ever discussed them with Tidus. Both Jecht and Driscoll are able to acknowledge their failings to everyone but the people it really matters to. Despite this, Tidus is able to forgive his father. As the game progresses, we see Tidus start to reconcile with Jecht internally, swearing to free him from his existence as sin. When Oren shares with Tidus the message that Jecht truly loved him, he's embarrassed at first, but once Oren is out of earshot, he expresses sincere gratitude. And whilst Tidus is initially annoyed at his father's fame in Spira, he is eventually able to move past it and, like Yuna, overcome his father's legacy. Both Tidus and Yuna are able to acknowledge the successes and histories of their fathers, and yet, at the same time, they are able to step out of their shadows. Seymour, on the other hand, lets his hate consume him, and, in taking his father's role in the church, he is symbolically unable to separate himself from his father. Without this separation, growth is impossible, and so his hatred spreads to include the entire world. Tidus carries his hate for a long time as well. In flashbacks to when he was 7 years old, he's insistent he never wants Jecht to return.
But if he dies, you'll never be able to tell him how much you hate him.
And at the end of the game, he finally gets to deliver this message that he has carried for 10 years.
End this.
Dad,
Yeah.
I hate you.
However, at this point in the game, it's clear to everyone, the audience, Tidus, his friends, Jecht, that he doesn't really mean it. As Jecht starts to succumb to his injuries, Tidus holds him, and they share a moment. And in his final words to his dad, we see that he has finally moved past his hatred. You know, for the first time, I'm glad to have you as my father.
In the West, Final Fantasy X is considered a pretty good entry to the series. It has its detractors, its die-hard fans, but not many people consider it their favourite. In Japan, however, Final Fantasy X is considered the best game in the entire series. And this was even proven in a countrywide poll by the NHK, Japan's national broadcaster. But why is this? Well, it's because Final Fantasy X deals with themes that are relevant to Japanese society more than any other game in the series. One of the key noted consequences of filial piety is the establishment of a clear hierarchical power structure within the family. Then this extends to broader society as well. In Japan, this structure is highly regimented and enforced even to this day. one must be deferent to their superiors, their boss, their parents, the police. And whilst this culture definitely has its benefits, for example, Japan's internationally recognized low crime rates, historically, it has also led to an underreporting of abuses of power and violence, both within the family unit and in broader society such as work as well. In Final Fantasy X, or more recently games like Persona 5, we can see a retaliation or pushback towards this culture. We see our protagonists speaking truth to power and seeking to overthrow a system that no longer works for them. Yuna's refusal to be a futile sacrifice is a rejection of a culture that demands obedience to tradition, stoically doing one's duty. Tidus too refuses to bow to these hierarchies, calling out abuses of power wherever he sees them, whether that be within the Church of Yevon or within his own familial relationships. Our heroes refuse to repeat the mistakes of the past, refuse to follow in the footsteps of their fathers, Vraska and Jekt, and instead forge their own path. But, crucially, they do not allow their anger, their hatred, their disillusionment with the powers of the past to overcome them. And, because of this, unlike Seymour, they are able to move beyond them and create a new world. Hi everyone, thanks for sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any thoughts about what I've said today, please let me know in the comments down below. I'd be really interested to read your opinions. Also, if you want to see more from the channel, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Okay, bye.